If you think prison walls stopped the most dangerous criminal organization in American history, you are dead wrong. Subscribe right now, hit that bell, and leave a comment below telling me, do you think anyone is truly untouchable? Because after this story, you might just believe they are. The morning of March 4th, 2019 started like any other morning inside Pelican Bay State Prison, California. Cold concrete, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the distant echo of steel doors slamming shut somewhere deep in the bowels of the security housing unit, a place the inmates simply called the SHU. But at 6:47 a.m., something was different. Correctional Officer Danny Reyes was making his standard rounds along the C-block corridor when he noticed it. Cell 114. The floor drain. A thin, dark ribbon of red seeping out from underneath the door and curling slowly along the cracked tile toward the drain in the center of the hallway. He stopped. He radioed it in.
I need to
and
tell
when they
you what
opened
really
that door,
happened that night.
what they found inside
Go
made
ahead.
3 veteran
I saw
officers physically step back. Marcus Webb, 34, an inmate serving a 12-year sentence for armed robbery, was on the floor. He had been beaten with a precision that investigators would later describe as almost surgical. No frantic, panicked violence. This was deliberate, controlled. A message, not just a murder. The entire block had been on lockdown since the previous night. No one got in. No one got out. Which meant whoever did this was still inside. Detective Carla Voss arrived from the Pelican Bay Investigative Services Unit just after 8 that morning. She was 41, sharp-eyed, with 17 years of experience investigating prison-related crime. She had seen gang violence. She had seen retaliation hits. But as she crouched down beside the forensic team and studied the body, something about the clean, methodical nature of it made the back of her neck go cold. On Marcus Webb's left forearm, carved with what appeared to be a sharpened piece of metal, were 2 letters. UB. Carla already knew what those 2 letters meant. Everyone in California law enforcement did. The Aryan Brotherhood. Founded in 1964 inside San Quentin State Prison, the Aryan Brotherhood, or the AB, had grown from a small white supremacist prison gang into what the FBI would later classify as one of the most violent and organized criminal enterprises in the United States. They made up less than 1% of the federal and state prison population. Yet they were responsible for nearly 30% of all prison murders. But here's the thing that made Marcus Webb's murder particularly disturbing. Marcus Webb was not a rival gang member. He was not a threat. He was not on any known hit list. He was a low-level offender with no known gang affiliations. So why had the AB put their signature on him? Carla requested Webb's full prison record, visitor logs, and cell block communications immediately. While her team worked the scene, she walked the corridor. She knocked on doors. She asked questions. And every single inmate she spoke to did the same thing. They looked at the floor. They said nothing. That silence was its own kind of answer. By noon, Carla had pulled Marcus Webb's phone records from the prison's monitored call system. Most were routine. Family calls. A few calls to a public defender. But there was one call, placed just 36 hours before his death, that stopped her cold. The number on the other end was listed under a name she immediately recognized. Thomas Icepick Garner. A man currently serving 2 consecutive life sentences in the same facility. A man who, according to federal intelligence files, sat on what investigators called the Commission, the secret internal council through which the Aryan Brotherhood ran its operations, not just inside Pelican Bay, but across the entire California prison system and into the streets beyond the walls. Marcus Webb had called one of the most dangerous men in American prison history just 1.5 days before he was murdered. Carla leaned against the cold concrete wall of the interview room and stared at the call log printout in her hand. Marcus Webb was not a target, she thought. He was a witness. And then her phone buzzed. It was her partner, Officer Trent Cole, calling from the records room down the hall. His voice was tight when she answered. Carla, he said. You need to come look at this right now. Webb wasn't just calling Garner. He was working for us. Webb was a confidential informant. And someone inside this building just leaked his file. The fluorescent light above her head flickered once. Then went dark. The records room at Pelican Bay sat at the far end of the administrative wing, a windowless box stuffed with filing cabinets, outdated computer terminals, and the particular smell of institutional paper and stale coffee that Carla had always associated with bad news. She pushed through the door to find Officer Trent Cole standing over a desk, his face pale under the harsh overhead light. He pointed at the screen without saying a word. The file was open. Marcus Webb's confidential informant profile, a document that was supposed to be accessible only to the Investigative Services Unit supervisor, the warden, and a sealed federal contact at the FBI field office in Sacramento, had been accessed at 11:48 p.m. the previous night, 14 minutes before the estimated time of Marcus Webb's death. Carla pulled on a pair of latex gloves and leaned in close. The access log showed a valid administrator credential, badge number 0047. She cross-referenced it immediately. The badge belonged to Senior Correctional Officer Raymond Holt, a 22-year veteran of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. A man 2 years from retirement. A man with a spotless record and a commendation plaque hanging on the wall of his office 3 doors down the hall. Carla straightened up slowly. Pull his shift logs for last night. Trent was already typing. He clocked out at 9:30. Officially off the premises by 10. Officially, Carla repeated. The word hung between them like smoke. They found Raymond Holt in the staff parking lot 40 minutes later. He was sitting in his truck with the engine running and both hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at the chain-link fence like a man who already knew they were coming. When Carla tapped on the window, he didn't flinch. He just turned his head slowly and looked at her with eyes that were empty in a way that made her stomach drop. He didn't deny it. Inside the administrative interview room, with 2 federal agents from the Sacramento field office now present, Raymond Holt sat with his hands folded on the table and told them a story that took 47 minutes and left everyone in the room completely still. It had started 3 years ago. His daughter, Nicole, had racked up a debt with a street-level dealer in Eureka. Nothing catastrophic at first. Then it escalated. Then the dealer was connected, as it turned out, to an AB-affiliated crew operating out of Humboldt County. One night, 2 men came to Raymond's house. They sat in his living room. They were polite. They were calm. And they told him exactly what they needed from him and exactly what would happen to Nicole if he declined. They never threatened me directly, Raymond said quietly, staring at the table. They didn't have to. The message was clean. I give them what they ask for when they ask for it, or my daughter doesn't come home one night. For 3 years, Raymond Holt had been a ghost inside the machine. He fed them inmate information. He flagged confidential informants. He confirmed transfer schedules and cell block assignments. All of it filtered through a single contact, a man he knew only by a nickname he refused to say out loud until one of the federal agents slid a photograph across the table. Raymond looked at it for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Thomas Icepick Garner. Carla leaned forward. Garner is running this from inside the SHU. He's in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. How is any communication getting out? Raymond closed his eyes. It's not phones. It's not letters. They use what they call the pipeline. He explained it slowly, as though each word cost him something. The pipeline was a relay system built entirely through legal channels. Inmate attorneys passed written messages disguised inside privileged legal correspondence, which is fully protected from staff inspection under California law. Family visitors carried verbal code phrases that were meaningless to any guard listening in. And at the center of it all, coordinating every thread, was a woman named Sandra Keel. Sandra Keel was Thomas Garner's sister. She visited him every 3rd Sunday without fail. She was a licensed paralegal. She was soft-spoken and well-dressed and had never once raised a flag in the visitor screening process. She was also, according to Raymond Holt, the most important operational asset the Aryan Brotherhood had in Northern California. Carla pushed back from the table and walked to the corner of the room. Her mind was moving fast now, pulling at every thread simultaneously. If Garner was communicating through the legal pipeline, then Marcus Webb's cover had been blown not in a moment of carelessness, but through a deliberate and sophisticated intelligence operation running parallel to the very system designed to contain it. This was not gang violence. This was not prison politics. This was organized crime operating at a level that the walls of Pelican Bay had never actually interrupted. She stepped back into the hallway to call her supervisor. As she raised her phone, Trent appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving fast, his expression cutting through the fluorescent haze with urgency she hadn't seen from him all day. "We have a problem," he said, slightly breathless as he reached her. "Another one," she said. "Sandra Keel had a scheduled visit today." He paused. "She was processed through the visitor entrance at 8 this morning. That was 4 hours ago." He held up his tablet. The visitor log was open on the screen. "She never checked out, Carla. She's still somewhere inside this building." Carla turned slowly and looked back down the long concrete corridor toward the deepest section of the facility, toward the SHU, toward the sealed block where Thomas Garner sat in a 6 by 10 foot cell with no television, no phone, and no visible means of contact with the outside world. And yet somehow, from inside that concrete box, he had ordered a murder, exposed a federal informant, compromised a corrections officer for 3 years, and now had his primary courier unaccounted for inside the most secure prison in the state of California. Carla hit the radio on her shoulder. "I need a full facility sweep. All visitor personnel, all non-essential staff. Now." The alarm began to wail. Somewhere deep in the building, a door slammed. They found Sandra Keel 17 minutes into the sweep. She was in the staff medical bay on the East Wing, sitting calmly in a plastic chair with her handbag on her lap and her ankles crossed, as though she were waiting for a bus. She looked up at Carla and the 2 federal agents who filled the doorway and offered them a small, composed smile that made Carla's skin crawl. "I think I got turned around," Sandra said pleasantly. "These hallways all look the same." She was 44 years old, professionally dressed, and had the measured stillness of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment. Carla had interviewed hundreds of people in her career. She could read panic, guilt, defiance, and deception. What she saw in Sandra Keel was something rarer and more unsettling than all of those combined. Sandra Keel was completely unafraid. They detained her for questioning under federal authority and moved her to a secure interview room in the administrative wing. For 2 hours, she said almost nothing. She asked for her attorney. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. And while she waited, she watched Carla with a patient, almost clinical attention that felt less like a woman under suspicion and more like a woman conducting her own quiet assessment of the situation. It was the FBI forensic team that broke the silence, not Sandra. At 3:22 that afternoon, they processed her visitor badge and personal effects. Inside the lining of her handbag, stitched with professional precision into the base beneath a false leather panel, they found a single folded piece of paper. The writing on it was in a shorthand code that took the Bureau's cryptography unit in Sacramento less than 3 hours to crack. What it contained was not a message from Garner going out. It was a message coming in, delivered to Sandra during her visit, passed through a method so simple that it had gone undetected for years. A book. Garner was permitted 2 personal books in his cell at any given time, a standard allowance under correctional policy. He had cycled through titles with his sister for years, returning finished books and receiving new ones through the standard visitor exchange process, each one inspected for contraband by staff who checked for physical objects hidden inside the pages. What no one had checked for, until now, was the pages themselves. Garner had developed a micronotation system, tiny pencil marks on specific letters across specific pages that, when mapped to a key Sandra carried memorized, spelled out full operational instructions. Transfer orders, names, addresses, money movements, contract authorizations. The book Sandra had carried in that morning was a 340-page copy of John Steinbeck's East of Eden. Inside it, encoded across 94 pages, was a complete operational directive for AB activity across 7 California facilities, 3 federal institutions, and 4 external street crews operating in Los Angeles, Sacramento, Stockton, and Portland, Oregon. Carla stood over the decrypted document for a long time without speaking. Thomas Garner had been in solitary confinement for 11 years. No phone, no internet, no direct contact with the outside world beyond monitored visits and inspected mail. And from inside that 6 by 10-foot cell, he had been running a criminal network with the organizational sophistication of a mid-sized corporation. They moved on Garner immediately. When they opened his cell door at 4:45 p.m., he was sitting on the edge of his bunk reading. He was 58 years old, lean, with pale gray eyes and the unhurried composure of a man who had spent more than 3 decades calmly navigating the most dangerous environment in American corrections. He looked up at Carla without surprise, without alarm, and without any readable emotion at all. "Mr. Garner," she said, "we need to talk." He closed his book slowly, set it on the bunk beside him, folded his hands in his lap, and then he said something that Carla would replay in her mind for months afterward. "Detective, you found one pipeline. You want credit for that, I understand. But you should know something before you get too comfortable." He paused. "The commission has been running since 1964. Presidents have come and gone. Wardens have come and gone. You'll come and go too." He tilted his head slightly. "The pipeline you found today was the one we let you find." The cell block was completely silent. Carla held his gaze. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, federal racketeering, and obstruction of justice. Anything you say from this point forward." "I know my rights," he said quietly. And then he smiled. The federal case against Thomas Garner and Sandra Keel moved through the courts over the following 18 months. Raymond Holt cooperated fully with prosecutors and entered a protected witness arrangement. Sandra Keel was convicted on federal racketeering and conspiracy charges and sentenced to 22 years. The AB-connected street crews in Los Angeles and Sacramento were dismantled through coordinated FBI and DEA operations that resulted in 34 arrests across 4 states. Thomas Garner was transferred to ADX Florence in Colorado, the federal government's only supermax facility, a prison so isolated and controlled that it is sometimes called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Solitary confinement. No visitors. No book exchange. For 11 months, investigators monitored every conceivable channel and found nothing. No communications. No directives. No movement from the AB networks that could be traced back to Garner. Carla Voss closed the web case officially in January 2021. She accepted a commendation from the FBI field office in Sacramento. She took 2 weeks off. She tried to feel like it was over. On the morning she returned to work, a package was waiting on her desk. No return address. Postmarked from a city in Oregon she didn't immediately recognize. Inside was a single item, a copy of East of Eden. She stood over it for a very long time without touching it. Then she put on her gloves and opened to the first page. The margins were completely clean. No marks. No code. Nothing. But tucked inside the back cover was a small handwritten note on plain white paper. 4 words, printed in block letters with no signature. "We know you're reading." Carla set the book down carefully, walked to her window, looked out at the gray California morning for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and started making calls because somewhere in a system that was supposed to contain the uncontainable, something was still moving. And it never stopped. If that ending just rewired something in your brain, good. That means it worked. The Aryan Brotherhood story doesn't end in a courtroom. It never has. Hit subscribe right now because the next story goes even deeper, and trust me, you are not ready for what's coming.